Hey guys, welcome back to another JamieBot video. In this one, it's actually a special edition where we're going to be building an actual real app, which we're going to publish to the App Store. And this app is going to be called CritList. It's just an idea for an app I have. So CritList stands for like critical things list. And my idea for the app is to basically just have it be a simple list of things to do, but these things are like your critical items. So just doing some design here, this is kind of what I think it's going to look like. It'll have the title up there. And of course this will look better, but I'm just doing some basic prototyping here. And then you'll just have your list of things to do down here, task 1, task 2, and then you'll probably be able to swipe left on them in order to delete them. And then there's going to be a simple plus button up here in order to add new items to the list. And at the bottom here I want to have some sort of basic navigation. The very leftmost thing is going to be like the actual critical tasks for that day. So this will have some sort of icon like a exclamation point or something. And then I was thinking of also having like a portion here where you could view tasks that you want to do later. So this is like exclamation point is now, then the Z's are for later. And then there will be like some sort of checkmark symbol for tasks which you have completed. And then finally there will be like a profile section. This will be like an icon of a person. And that's it. That's my design for this app. This is personally what I do in a given day. I wake up and then I decide what tasks I want to work on that day. Usually pulling some from the Z category over to my critical tasks for today list. And then once I complete those tasks, I move them over into the done category. So this is basically just me making an app of how I like to organize my to-do list and making an app specifically for that. And actually a lot of people do this. You'll hear a lot of people talk about their important things list, and this is just that. It's specifically for critical things. So I think this is a great app idea. Let's get excited about it. Let's build this thing, and then once we build it, I'm going to put it on the App Store, and then y'all can check it out. Also, I just wanted to add that building an app is a long process. So if you don't have the grit to sit down and get it done, then this video is probably not going to be of much help to you. Since building an app takes a while, I'm going to divide it into multiple parts. So with that said, I hope you enjoy this part 1 of building an app in Ionic 4. To start off here, I'm going to generate my project using Ionic, start, and then I'm going to call the project CritList, like this. If this is new to you, be sure to check out my video on installing Ionic. Okay, I just opened that folder in VS Code, and we're just going to start generating a bunch of stuff, because I already know what we need. So looking back at our design, this is why the design is so important, because we can just move a lot faster with this in mind. So we're going to need a crit page. That'll be for the critical tasks. And then we're going to need a later page, so I'll generate that as well. We're going to need a done page, and we're going to need a profile page. And I have no use for this home class. I'm just going to delete that and go into the module file and delete that from the routes. And it changed the redirect for the root page, like if this is loaded on a website, to be crit. So that way by default we'll go to the crit page. We're going to be using Firebase as the backend. So on the Firebase console, I'm just going to create a new project. I'm going to call it CritList. Looks like my name is unique. That's good. I already checked it on the App Store and it's available. I accept the terms, create project. Okay, that's all done. Gonna click this web icon and grab this config, go back into my environment file and paste that in under Firebase. There we are. Gonna do that same for the production file. If environments are new to you, be sure to check out my video on environments. To get started, I'm going to have production and alpha be exactly the same project. Okay, I'm just going to link this to my Firebase project like this in the terminal. Firebase -p CritList init. CritList is my project ID, which is pretty nice. Just going to enable Firestore, functions, hosting, and storage. Basically just covering all my bases in case I need all those things. Just going to use the defaults for everything except TypeScript and TSLint. So I like TypeScript and I hate TSLint, and we're going to install the dependencies now. For public, we're going to use dist, and we are going to have it be a single page app. Just the defaults for that file. And we're just going to update this Firebase tools. And then in the angular.json, I'm going to change the output path to be dist, just to match our hosting location. And I'm also going to go to github.com, create a new repository for this crit list. And it is going to be open source, so you guys can check out the source code. And then I'm going to copy this remote add origin command, go back over to my terminal, and run git init, and then add the remote as the origin, and then git add -a, git commit -m init, and then push origin master. Okay, to see how our progress is coming along, let's serve up the app and check it out inside the browser. Reloading this, we should see that the source code is on there now. Great. I'm going to quickly add a readme that says minimal app made by JamieBot in order to track critical tasks, the perfect minimal to-do list for critical tasks. Another thing I like about this project is that there's a ton of to-do lists, but by niching down a little bit, might actually get some users with this thing. We'll see. Anyway, so that's the Git repository, and then I'm just going to reload my localhost page right here, and we're all set up. It says crit. Great. Okay, so the crit page is going to just have critical as the title. For done, we're just going to call it completed, and then for later, we're going to call it probably just later, and then for profile, it'll also just be called profile. This is like the display name for what the users will actually see. We just want to make sure it makes sense to new users who aren't coders. Okay, so for starters, in the crit.page.ts, I'm going to make an array called items, and I'm just going to put one thing in it initially called test, and then inside of my crit page, I'm going to make an ion list, and then inside of the ion list, I'm going to have an ion item, and the ion item is going to repeat using ng for every item of items. Then it's simply just going to show that items. So reloading the page, we see we have the item right there. And thinking about it now, two things. There's this padding on the outside we don't really want. I just want it to be flush with the side of it. And also, I'm going to have the item contain more information than just the text. So I'm going to call that test item the text attribute of each item. So it'll be called text. And then we also want more information, like maybe when it was created, and that's just going to be a timestamp. And then each item in the list also needs to have a position. I'm just going to call it pos. I'm going to set it equal to 0 initially. So this is kind of what our item will look like. Might add more stuff later, but that's it for now. I need to set up AngularFire 2 so that we can actually start writing data to Firebase. And then inside the module file, I'm just going to import the dependencies for Firebase up here, including the environment, and then set that up in the import section as well. So that will allow us to inject things like this wherever we need them, like AngularFire auth, and we're also going to need AngularFire store. Oh, speaking of AngularFire auth, I want it so that when you open the app, you need to sign in first, and then it will show you like your list of things, because like you need an account to write data to the database. So instead of the app.component.ts, I'm just going to add AngularFire auth as a dependency here as well. And then in the initialize app function, I'm going to subscribe to the auth state. So I'm going to make a page called login, just generating that right now. And then depending on whether the user is logged in or not, I'm going to show either login, or I'm going to show like a tabs page. Speaking of that, I should generate that tabs page as well. Okay, so now we have tabs page and a login page. Okay, so I'm just going to set up my tabs page based on an example from their docs. So we have crit, later, we have the done, and profile. Okay, and we can just leave the icons like that for now. Just want to make sure that we can get that page working. And like I was saying, if the user is not logged in, so if not user, then we need to like pop up the login modal. I think that's how I'll do it. So I'm going to inject the modal controller like this and auto import it up there, and then pass it the login page like this. Okay, and then once it's created, and it's given back to me in the promise, then I'm going to call modal.present. And so let's check that out on the page. Looks like it says no component factory found for login page. So to fix that, inside of the login module, I've just added to the entry components array the login page, and then also in the root at module, I've imported the login page module. So you got to do both those things, otherwise Ionic won't let you open it as a modal. And then refreshing our page, we see that now the login modal is showing. So this is great. And we're also getting this error about timestamps and snapshots. I think that's just from one of the dependencies that we're using, so I'm going to ignore that. For our authentication, we're going to use Firebase UI Angular. So to install that, I'm just going to copy this command right here and go run it in my project. And then inside of the module file, I'm going to import it like they recommend, like this, and then copy their config variable and paste it up here. I think I'm only going to use email. That's my favorite one. I just like the accounts being created under my app's name. So here I'm just going to put email auth provider. For the terms of service and privacy, I'm going to have relative URLs to some pages that I'm going to generate right now. So I'm going to generate 2 more pages for TOS and privacy, and I'll just set those up later. And then I don't like using the account chooser. I don't find it helpful at all. And then down here, I'm just going to initialize the Firebase UI module like this, like it recommends. Now with that all set up, let's serve the app once again, see if we can get our UI working. Also, we gotta import the CSS for the styling to work. So inside of my global CSS file, I'm just gonna go down here and import the Firebase UI SCSS. And then it says to use that, all we gotta do is use Firebase UI as a tag, like so. So I'm gonna put that inside of the login page. And I'm also gonna capitalize login. Okay, it looks like we got an error. Firebase UI is not a known element. Instead of importing it in the main module, I'm going to try instead importing it into the login module specifically. That will probably make more sense. Okay, so that's all moved over here now, including the terms of service and so forth. Alright, bingo, there we go. There's our sign-in method. Also, inside of the Firebase console, we got to go over to authentication, set up sign-in method, and in email and password, I'm just going to click enable, and that's it. And so now I should be able to actually create an account and log in. So I'm just going to use this email, type in my name, and boom, we're logged in because the UI went away. We should probably close this modal once the user is logged in. So inside of the app.component.ts, I'm going to store a reference to that modal. So I'm going to call it like login modal. And then when it's created, I'm going to assign it like this. And then once the user is logged in and we detect that change, I want to say this dot login modal dot dismiss. I believe that's what it is. I'm going to declare the type of ion modal up here just to make sure. So autocomplete will say, yep, dismiss is what it's called. Oh, and we only want to do this if the login modal exists, because otherwise we'll get an error if the user starts out logged in. And we also need a logout button in order to test that behavior, because right now we're just already logged in, because once you're signed in, you stay signed in until you log out. Okay, but right now we can't even get to the profile page because our tabs isn't working. So first we gotta fix tabs working, and then we can fix the logout. So I was looking at the tabs example for the Ionic tabs default project, and what they do is something like this. So the tabs actually needs to have its paths as children. So instead of defining these all one by one, first I just redirect the empty path to tabs instead of crit, like it was before, and then inside of this object right here I configure all of the children. So I'll just do these one by one. We have crit, later, done, and a profile. And then at the bottom right here, we can just redirect the root one, root path to crit. And then going back to our page, I need to choose the path as the root. And then also I'm getting this error that says tabs page is not part of any module. So I'm just going to go over to that module file and import the tabs page module up here. Okay, now it says it can't find crit module. I'm just going to replace all those double dots with single dots because the relative path to my file is different than their example. So we're in file app-routing.module.ts, and from here it's just /crit will put us into that crit folder, and this is just referencing the module which we'd like to load for the path crit. So with all that, by the way, this would have been a lot easier if I just started out the project with tabs generated, but I didn't. So now we're here and it's working now, so that's great. So here are tabs at the bottom, and they do indeed change the tabs and the URL, which is very nice. So great, let's change these icons as well. So I'm just here at ionicons.com, and I'm just going to browse around for some icons, which I think would be nice. Ooh, this one would be good for the very first one, so it's called alert. So back in my tabs file, that's where I configure the icons. I'm going to change this one from flash to alert. I mean, flash was kind of cool too, the lightning bolt. We'll see how this one looks. And then for later, we want something like sleepy. I'm going to choose this moon icon for like signifying night, just later. So we'll put in moon right there. And then for completed, I'm sure there's one for that. Check. Okay, let's do checkmark circle. And then for profile, see if we can find one. Profile, person. Let's just do the person one. I like that one better. So person. And then back on our page, it's going to reload, and we see our icons. Critical. I kind of like the flash icon here instead. It makes it seem like less like something's wrong, you know. So I'm just going to put flash back there, and there we go. So we'll stick with this for now. Next thing I wanted to do was add a logout button to the profile page. So in the profile page, I'm also going to add a header which just has the username. So I'll just say user.name. We'll make that variable in a second. And then we'll just have an ion button with the color as warning. And that's going to call a function on click called signout. And then on signout, what I like to do is call this.ifauth.auth.signout. And then once that's done, I like to reload the page using location.reload, and that's just because I don't want the user messing with stuff on the page once they're logged out. Just wipe out the app, just reload the whole app. And then also we need that user variable, which I was talking about earlier, for showing the username in an H1. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to subscribe to the auth state and grab the user object that results from that, and then set this.user to be that user as long as the user exists. We just don't want to get an access error if they're on the profile page. We don't want it to go undefined dot something, because then we'll get an error. So we only want to assign it if the user is logged in, and then we won't get any of those errors. So checking that out, looks like I messed up with something. Oh, it's not user.name, it's user.displayname. Okay, there we go, and I'm not sure why that button is white. I'm probably just doing something stupid. No, that all looks fine. Maybe the color is messed up? Okay, so it looks like it was that color. I'm going to go and look at my themes file so I can see what was wrong with that color. Oh, it's warning, not worn. My bad. So I'm going to go back inside of the HTML, and instead of worn, I'm going to put warning. It's confusing because in Angular material it's called worn. Okay, there we go. That looks better. Sign out. So when I click that button, it'll reload everything. Also, I don't know what this stupid account chooser is. I thought I removed the account chooser. Okay, it looks like I forgot to set it to none. I just removed it, so I'm just going to go back into the login page and set it as none, because I really don't like the account chooser. I think it's annoying. So going back to our page, we can see that we are logged out, which is great. And actually, something that I just realized is that if the page that's in the background is using the user object and it's undefined, we could get a lot of errors, and I just don't want to check that all over the place. So I'm going to refactor the app.component to be a little bit more sleek. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to inject the router like this. And then if the user is not logged in, I'm going to navigate to the URL of /login. Okay, and then if they are logged in, then I'm going to navigate to /tabs, and then they'll be able to view their list and so forth. Okay, so just going to the root here, it immediately redirects me to /login, so that's great. And then it says sign in with the email, so I'll do that. Okay, great, so now I'm all logged in, and I can use the app as normal, and I can sign out. Great, so this is all working just fine. So going back to our diagram here, the thing we're really missing is this add button. So let's go ahead and add that. The way we do that is we first add this ion buttons with slot equals either start or end. I'm going to choose end here, and then we just throw in an ion button inside of here, and then inside of there I'm going to put my ion icon with the name of add. So let's first just make sure that that shows up. Okay, so there we go, there's our add button. Of course it's not going to do anything yet, so I'm going to make it call a function called add. So on click, it's just going to say add, and that's a function. So we'll make that function right here, and I think this should pop up an alert which allows us to enter text as well as press enter or cancel. So I'm going to go ahead and import the alert controller. Okay, and then the way that we use that is something like this. I'm going to make this an async function first so that we can use await inside of here. Then we just grab the alert control and call create. And then the header is like what we want at the top. We'll just say new task, and then we don't really need a subtitle. And then we also don't really need a message. And then we need two buttons in here. One's going to be called cancel, and then the other one's going to be called add. And then I'm going to add an input down here like this. And the name of the input is going to be called just task, I guess. And then the type is text, and the placeholder is going to be my task. Okay, so let's try that out. So here when I click the add button, we get our alert, and then that looks pretty good actually. Quite good. We can enter in text right here, and it's scrollable. So that looks great actually. I don't think I have any complaints about that. Maybe the cancel and add button could be distinguished a little bit. The way we do that is we just define these out a little bit more. Add a role to the cancel button called cancel. We don't really need that CSS class. And then we also have handlers for each one of these. So now we should see logs when we click each of the buttons. So we'll click add up here. OK. Get a console.log confirm OK, so that works great. And cancel. Confirm cancel. Great. So I know that they look exactly the same, but on a mobile device these buttons will be distinguished a lot more based on the individual device's styling. Alright, so now let's make it so that pressing OK will actually add the item to Firebase. So the way that we do that is we grab the database object which we injected earlier, and we say this.db.collection, and then we name the collection which we would like to add to. So mine is going to be stored in users slash, then we'll grab the user ID. We'll have a collection called crit. We're just going to name them after the things that we named them in the UI. And so crit will be for all the critical tasks, and then we're just going to call .add once we have the name of the collection. Then here we can pass in the actual object which represents the task. So it'll have text. That's the first thing. And hopefully that's just stored under the name here. Hopefully that's what this name is for. That's kind of what I was hoping that it was for. So here I'm going to pass in val, and then text should just be val.text. I'm quickly just going to console.log that just to confirm that that's actually the case. So I'm just going to console.log val for when you click OK. And then I'm going to click this plus button, type in something, press OK. Okay, yeah, so it is under the field of task. So, oops, I typed this wrong. It's val.task. Okay, so that's awesome. So we're able to get the text when they press OK, so we can add that to Firebase. Oh, and before I forget, we actually need to set up the Firebase database by just clicking this Create Database button right here. We're going to start it in locked mode because the security rules for this app are going to be super easy. We'll just quickly do those right now. We're just going to match to user ID, and then we're simply going to allow read and write only if the person who's trying to write is the same as the user under which they're writing. And we're actually going to match all documents under that path. So I think that's right. We'll need to check it later to make sure that it is right, but for now it should be good. So let's finish up writing this. This part is kind of hard, the positioning of the items. I kind of want to draw a picture to better understand exactly what needs to go on here. So just going to make a new document here and just kind of think aloud, because this problem is not really exactly trivial. So like, let's say that the user adds one item to the list. It's easy because it's the only item in the list, but like, if they add another one, should it go above it or below it? And how do we store that in Firebase? Originally I was thinking it would just be a number. Let's explore how that would look. So maybe this first item would be at index 0, and then when we add the next item, I want it to go above the first one. So maybe it will just take whatever the index of the first one is and subtract it, and we'll be able to have negative indices. We'll just call it the position, that makes more sense. It's called pos in the code. So that would work. So this one would be like -1. And then when we return the results from Firebase, we'll order them by us sending position. The only problem I can think with that though is that if the user has like multiple devices, then potentially they could like get out of sync if they added an item at around the same time. But in that case, that just means that they'll have the same index, and the order of those items will be like, it'll basically just be random. And since that's like such a rare case, like the user would need to do it like at the exact same time, or they would need to bring both devices offline and then bring them online at the same time, having added an item at the same index in both cases. So I think that this position is good. Just grab the position of the first one and then -1 from it. The only problem though is reordering. So it's kind of tricky because if the list is a large number of things, then that means that if the user wants to change the order of the items, then like if they want to insert one between both of these things, like the user wants to insert an item right here, then the indices are kind of screwed up. I guess we could technically make it decimals, like we could just divide the numbers by 2, but then that means that there's like only a finite number of things that you could have between each item. Another way to do this is what's called a linked list, and so we could have like all the items in a list just contain references to the other items. So like the first item would point to the second item, and the second item would point to the third item. And then if you wanted to insert between 2 items, then you would just change the one before it to point to the new item, and then the new item to point to this item, and so forth. So inserting would be a lot easier. However, retrieving the actual list would take forever, because you would have to make one call to Firebase for every item in the list, and that really kind of sucks. Another thing we could do is just not allow reordering and then go with this solution. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards right now. Also, like if we did decide to support reordering in this index model, then I guess we could just like iterate over all of the items and then like change their index. So I guess it is technically possible. So I kind of like this way because it's the fastest, and we're probably not going to have reordering at first. So let's just go with that way. So the position of the newest element is either going to be, if there are items in the list, then it's going to be the first item's position. Let's actually go positive. So instead of going negative like this, let's just make it positive. So we'll say +1. Otherwise it's going to be 0, so we'll just start at 0. And then I also want to add some code to get the UTC timestamp and put that in there as well. So the UTC timestamp is going to be like when it was created. And the reason it's in UTC is because like if the user is changing time zones, you want the date to be in UTC. And this is just some code that I copy and paste into every new project I make because you always want the dates in UTC because otherwise it's just a huge headache, and that's what UTC is for. So I recommend always using UTC, and then we can just pass that in right here. So when we press add, we will get text, a position, and we will also get a timestamp called created. And by timestamp, I just mean like a date. Oh, and I just realized that right here I typed user instead of users. So I just prefer it like this, to be under users/user ID, and then whatever the list name is. And then in order to grab the items from Firebase, we just use code like this, this.db.collection, and then collection path, and then on snapshot changes, we subscribe to the changes. So this is basically like listening to the changes to that collection from Firebase. And then once we get that collection snapshot back, then we can iterate over each one of them and then just push them one by one onto the items array. And then at the very beginning we need to clear it to the empty array because like otherwise every time you added an item to the list, it would re-add all the items in the list to the list. So we're just going to clear it out first and then we'll add the items to the list. So let's go check it out. Looks like we're getting an error that says can't read property UID of null. That's because the user isn't logged in when we first call this, unfortunately. So we're going to have to subscribe to the auth state, and then we get the user object. If the user doesn't exist, meaning we're not logged in, then we're just going to return. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and then listen to that collection, which we're so excited to see actually working. Okay, let's try adding a task up here. And so we have our item in the collection, and for some reason there's no data showing inside of it. Oh, I think when we were iterating over the collection from Firebase, it is not exactly that simple. We don't just push each item in the collection. It's like nested in here. It's .doc.data. This is our actual JSON object, this thing. So it's just kind of hidden inside of there. Okay, so now we see the actual object. That looks good. Let's try adding another one. We'll call it test. Alright, we added that. That's on there as well. I'm also going to add this query reference right here. This is just a function where we can configure any querying we need to do. Specifically, we need to like order the results by the position. So the way we do that is we just return ref.orderBy, and then position is the field we want to order by, and it is actually descending since we decided that when we add new items, we're going to add 1 to the topmost item. So first one is 0, second one is 1. So we want to order descending, like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So now we see the proper order, which is test and then OUU. Okay, and I also want to make the ion item slide instead of just sitting there. So like we want to be able to delete it and move it to different lists. So I just have some code here. Grab this from the docs. We're going to repurpose this for our own item. So it's instead of ion item, it's called ion item sliding. And we still need to iterate over each item in the items. And we still need this text to be right here as the label. So let's first just check this out to see how it looks on our page. So for each item we can slide it. Okay, so sliding to the left gives us unread, and sliding to the right gives us favorite and share. So that's kind of the opposite of what I want. I want multiple buttons on the right. So I'm going to move this down here and then change the top one. Instead of favorite, this is going to be complete. Okay, and we're going to call a function called complete. And I actually want to put an ion icon in here instead with checkmark circle. So this is going to be like for completing an item. So seeing how that looks, we see a check mark over there. That looks good. Let's also change the color to be success so the user knows that they're doing a good job. All right, so dragging over, we see the green now. And again, that just comes from the variables.scss. There's a success color here. There's a whole bunch of these. Okay, and then for the end, I'm going to have an option to delete it. That'll be this one down here that's already danger. So I'm just going to put another ion icon in here with the, it's the close icon. And then instead of sharing it, we're going to delete it. And then let's just duplicate this one since it's closer to what I want for the second one, which is we want to be able to move the item to later. So let's change the icon to be moon, and then let's change the color to be primary. And instead of delete, we're going to call later. Okay, so swiping left on our item, we see X and moon. I'm just going to reverse the order of those, and then it should be more like what I want. So the X is on the right hand side, which is what I want. And I also want you to be able to keep dragging, and then the item will just be deleted. So the way that we do that is on the one I want to have it default to, which is delete. I just put expandable, and then in the ion options on ion swipe, I just call delete. Okay, so now I can click and drag all the way, and then it's not going to let me do it because I haven't defined the delete function down here. So gonna go back over to the page and then make all those functions. And so in order to really do anything in these methods, we need to actually store the ID of the item when we are pushing it on here, because the data right here does not have the ID. So this is kind of how I do that. I just grab that original data, and then I append a new field onto it called ID, and then I push it back onto the list like that. So I do this in almost every single one of my apps. So I recommend being very familiar with what this is doing. It just adds a new field because we will need that when we are trying to delete the item. So this is how we do that. We just grab that reference to that item, and then this is where we use the item ID at the very end of the path because it's a document, and then we just call delete on that. And then actually, if we want to complete the item, we also need to delete it. But then we just need to add it to the next list. So we'll just write it to the done list instead. So instead of delete, we call set, and then we just pass it that item, but we don't really want the item to have the ID field still, because then we would have the ID in the database twice. So we're gonna have to like pull it out first. So let ID equals item.id. Then we can use that ID right here. So we'll just copy that here and then change the path once again to done. So we gotta store it in a temporary variable before we delete it. So let's try again creating a new item called test, and then press OK. And oh, looks like we have an error, can't read pos of undefined. I wonder what I did to break that. Back in the add method, we're just checking to see items. I'm going to check items.length instead. I've noticed that sometimes just checking to see if items exists isn't enough. Like technically it's an empty array, so it should evaluate as falsy, but this will really evaluate as falsy because it's the length and it should just be 0. So that's kind of an extra measure we can take to make sure that we don't run into that bug that we just hit. So we're going to add another item. Worked that time, and then we're going to try adding it to the later list, and then back in Firebase, going to refresh once again, and then here we go, our item is in the later list, and the position actually needs to be changed. That's a bug right now, because when we're moving it to a different list, we need to get that list first, and then grab the first item in that list, so that we can add it to the top of that list. So back in here, what I'm first going to do before we add it to the new list is I'm first going to grab that entire collection, and so this will allow us to get that collection first, and we will need to order it like this using the same query function. So just going to paste that query function in here to make sure that we order the results by position descending first. And then what I'm also going to do is limit the number of results to 1 so that it only grabs me the very first item in the list. And then once we get that item back from Firebase, we can just iterate over the results, which we know there's only one, but we just have to iterate over them. That's how we access them. Then in here we can set the item position to be equal to, then we just grab that data dot pos, so that's how we grab that position. But in the case where there's no items in the list, then we want the item to just have a position of 0, just to kind of clean up the position every time you start a new list. So say item.pos starts out at 0, and then if there was at least one item in the list, then we'll go ahead and override the position with that data's position and then +1. So that way we'll keep adding to the index so that when we move items to a new list, it just goes to the top of the list. And since this code is getting kind of long, I'm going to refactor it into a different method, which is a little bit more generic. I'm just going to call it move item, and it's going to take as parameters an item as well as the list, which we would like to move it to. So the list goes here. So list is of type string. Alright, and then the list also goes here, and it goes here. Okay, so I think that's it. And then inside of this function, later and complete, we can just call move item. So this dot move item, and then we can pass in the item, and then we can also pass in the list, which is done. So you can see that this is like half as much code as it would otherwise be if I just copied and pasted it. So I really like refactoring things out into separate functions or something if there's going to be a lot of duplicate code. Okay, and let's test this out. So going back to the app, going to add a couple items. We'll just create them with the index that I know that I have, 0, 1, and then let's try moving this one over to the other list. Looks like nothing happened, might have messed up. So let's check out this move item function. Oh, looks like when I called delete, I accidentally used the target list as well. Whoops. This is the crit list. This is like the source. Let me just double check all those. So basically we delete from the crit list. Yeah, that's correct. And then we grab the new list, grab the first item, and then we set it, also using the new list name. So in our example, the new list name is later. So it gets the later list, and then it adds it to later using the set. So that looks just fine. So let's go back here and try once again. Click the moon, and away it goes. Let's go check the back end. So it looks like we have that one item. It's at position 3. That's fine because in this list there was already something at position 2. So it looks like it grabbed that. But point is, it moved over and it is at the correct index. This would be a lot easier to tell what was going on if we could actually see the other list over here. So let's work on that next. Since these three things are almost identical, I'm going to refactor our little crit page here into its own sort of generic list. So the way I'm going to do that is first going down here and then generating a new component. So Ionic G C for component, and then the component is going to be called list. And so within this list component, we're actually just going to copy all this code out and then put it inside of the list. And I'm just going to start substituting anything that says crit with like something generic. So like up here, this is the title. We'll say that's what it's called. And we're going to pass in all these variables from the crit page, which will host this component inside of it. I'll explain that more in a second. But for now, we're just going to pretend like title exists. Items, that's fine, that's generic sounding. Since we want the sliding options to be generic, we're actually just going to pass in these options as HTML using ng content. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. First, I'm just going to declare that input field for title. So we're going to go inside of the TS. Alright, and this component selector is app-list. So inside of anywhere where we want to use it, we just put app-list. So instead of all this stuff, we just put app-list, pass in the title, which is that input we just defined, and the title is going to be critical. And then inside of here, we can pass in our ion item options. And instead of calling these complete and so forth functions on this component, all that logic is going to be stuffed inside of the list component. So I'm going to call this list, and then instead of calling complete, we're going to call list.complete. Okay, so that'll just be an item on there. Okay, so the HTML is looking pretty good. We also need to move over the TypeScript, so I'm just going to cut like most of this code and then stuff it inside of the list component. Okay, then anywhere in here that says crit, we're going to need to replace that with a variable, and this variable will just be like the current list. So we'll just call that list, and we'll pass it in as an input variable. So we're just going to call that list, and then we'll pass it in as an input variable. So we're going to use this .list anywhere where we saw crit. So we see crit, and we replace it with this .list. Okay, and then we see crit, this .list. Okay, and then back inside of the crit configuration, up here we just pass in that input, which is list, and then the name of the list, and I'm going to call the list crit. Okay, so let's see how many errors we have. So let's start up the server once again. Blah, blah, blah. I think it's not a part of this module, so I'm actually going to make a new module just for components because it's easier to import them that way. So Ionic G module and then components. And then I'm going to move the list inside of the components module and add it to the declarations like this. And then back inside of the crit module, I'm going to import that components module. I'm going to serve the app once again, see if that fixed our little problem. Okay, now we have some errors talking about ion title. I think that's because this module, the components module, does not have the Ionic module added to it. So let's try that. Okay, we're back to that other error. The way I fixed that error is just adding it to the exports section, just so that when I import the components module into my module.ts, it's actually able to use it. Because if you don't add it to the exports, then it won't be able to do that. Okay, so my app is blank right now, and I'm guessing that's because I passed in the inputs wrong. So here when I'm passing in critical and crit, I need to declare them as like a string inside of the quotes. So I'm going to use single quotes inside of the double quotes. Otherwise, I think it's looking for a variable called critical and crit, which don't exist. There we go. So now I'm literally passing the string critical to it. So basically, I pass in the string right here, and then inside of the list component, it renders that string right here as title because it's passed in as an input variable. Okay, now it is still not loading the items. I believe we still have some items. Let me refresh. Should have items in a list called crit. Okay, so here's our crit list. Yeah, it still has 2 items in it. I'm just going to console.log that list so that we can make sure that it's actually passed. This .list, and then hopefully, well, not hopefully, I hope it doesn't print it, because that would explain the bug that we're having. Yeah, so it prints undefined, so that's good. That means that something's wrong with the way that we're passing this list in right here. Crit. I think maybe list might be like a reserved word or something. So I'm just going to call it name instead. So pass in the name of crit, and then I'm going to rename this list, rename symbol to name. And I'm also going to put it after title. No, it looks like it's still undefined. Maybe the input isn't ready in the constructor, so I'll try logging it in the ng on init. Okay, so it is getting it. It's called crit. So now I'm really curious why it's not working. I'm going to put a console.log inside of actually getting the results so we can see how many there are. Okay, so I'm just logging the collection snapshot length like that. Okay, the length is 2, so it did get them, it's just not rendering them. Okay, so inspecting the list here, it looks like there is stuff here. It looks like passing these options through the template variable isn't working. Not sure exactly why, but it's not working, so we're just gonna have to refactor it to like switch these on and off, so like we can configure maybe which ones are showing. So we'll just put an ngIf on each one of these things, and then the function isn't on the list item anymore. It's because like we are in the list object, so we can just remove that. And then also on the crit page we can remove this list tag right here, and just simplify our code and then pass in any options. So for crit, we are going to allow done, so we're going to set that to true. And we're also going to allow later. We also need another option for if we are in one of the other lists to move the item back to this list. So we'll make another item called crit, and it's going to be under allow crit. And then under allow crit for this one, we're going to set it to false. And that's just because we're already on the crit list. And then back inside the list, I'm just going to add a function, which will move it to the crit list. And that's just so that this option will actually work. And instead of moon, we can use flash. And yeah, let's see how that's looking on our page. Oh, it says can't bind to allow done. Looks like I forgot to declare those inputs. Okay, so just defining these right here, and these are of type boolean, and these two up here are both of type string. Okay, so now we have our inputs all squared out. Let's see if it's actually working now. Okay, looks like they're still not showing up, and I think it's because Ionic has some issues if you try to use components to make a new ion content. It likes for the ion content to be like a part of the root page, like this page. So like if there's an ion content, it wants it to be put like up here, like this. So I think I am going to do that instead. Just put the app list inside of the ion content, and then inside of the list, notice how it has ion content as well. I'll just take that out. And then instead of calling this an ion header, we're just going to put it as a regular toolbar. So we'll see if that works. Alright, there we go. The list is working. That was the problem. I've run into that before. I just remembered it. So yeah, you don't want to use ion content inside of components because Ionic gets confused. And now, for the most exciting part, we can take this ion content and put it over in the done page, and then pass in complete for the title, and then done for the list name, and then allow done is false, and allow crit is true. And then one more time inside of the later page, just paste that in. And notice how these pages are super simple, like they don't have any logic in them, it's all just configuring that one list component. So we've basically reduced the amount of code by like 3 times, which is super awesome. Alright, and then the title of this page is later, the list name is later, and then everything is true except for later. So the later list can move to everything except for later. Alright, so checking that out, gonna hop over to the later page, and we get an error, dang it. Oh, it says that app list is not added to this module. We gotta do that, I forgot about that. So we're just gonna add the components module to the later module, as well as the done module. Okay, there we go. Alright, let's try later this time. I'm not sure why there's 2 number 1s there. Now we can start debugging the moving lists and so forth. Okay, so let's try adding a new item to critical. I'm gonna call it apple, just so I can start remembering what these items are called. And then I'm gonna swipe left on it and try and move it to the later category. Then I'm gonna click on later, and apple is indeed part of that list and is no longer part of critical, so that worked. Now let's try moving it to the complete category. Also I'm gonna first go inside of list and make it so that you can also fully swipe on the allow done part of it. So I'll make that expandable, and then on full swipe it's going to call complete, and that'll just be a better user experience. That means you can full swipe right to complete an item. Okay, so heading over to later. Oh, and looks like I misspelled later inside of the later.html. I just said late, so we'll change that. Okay, going back to later once again, I'm going to full swipe green. Looks like it's still not working. I'm going to try just clicking it, see if that works. Okay, that doesn't work either. That means that the complete function is broken. Okay, so I'm just going to put a log inside of move item to see if that function is even called. So that function is called. but for some reason the rest of this isn't happening. I'm guessing maybe the item is undefined or something. So I'll log the item ID as well. Alright, the item ID is still defined. Oh, I hard-coded crit right here. That's supposed to be this dot name, so that's the name of the list. I thought I already did that. Maybe I missed one. So I'm going to search for crit again, make sure they're all generic. Yeah, so that's just the configuration. There's no more hard-coded crit lists in here, so it should be good to go now. And so now I'm going to try and complete Apple, and away it goes. Apple is now in the completed list. Not sure why it's in here twice. I'm going to try just clearing out these lists using the delete button just to kind of reset things and make sure everything's working. So now all the lists are blank, and then I'm going to add something. I'm going to add test to critical. We'll try completing it and make sure that goes over to completed. Great. Okay, now let's try making a new one called banana and another one called cherry. Okay, let's try moving cherry to completed. Okay, completed has cherry and test, so it's working. And they're in the correct order. Now let's try moving banana to completed. Okay, great. And I hope you guys know that these aren't really supposed to be fruits. They're supposed to be actual things to do, but it's just kind of easier to, name fruits than it is to think of things to do. The app is looking really good. One thing that would be nice is having like a counter up here as part of the title, like the number of items in the list. And that's really easy. I'm just going to go up here next to title and then put the item's length in parentheses. So let's check that out. Okay, there we go. Looks good, looks good. It would be nice if it showed a spinner while it was loading so that I didn't think that I had no items in my list. So I am going to add that. I'm going to add a variable called loading. And it's initially going to be true. And then when we finally get the items and assign them, then I'm going to set loading to be false. And then inside the HTML, I'm going to conditionally add a ion spinner using ngIf, and then it's only going to show up if loading. And then I think we'll also need to style this as well. Yeah, so right now it showed up on the left, and so I'm just going to add some margin left to the spinner in the SCSS. Alright, that looks better. Now it's not like so shoved against the side there. I also want the color of the spinner to be the primary color of the app. So now it's blue, and when we click on each one, it shows the loading thing, but it still says 0 at the top when it's loading, so I'm going to put this second part of the title in a span and just only show the length of the items if it's not loading. Okay, that looks way better. Alright, now this is a great checkpoint where I can back up my code to get. We can see we've made a lot of changes, but this is a great checkpoint. I got the lists working, so I'm going to get add-a, get commit -m, and I'm just going to say functional basics and push that to origin master. It's a good idea to back up every reasonable chance you get. No pun intended. Also it says that I need to poll first, so I'm going to run get poll origin master because I added a readme on the server a while ago, and then I can push after that. But yeah, just every checkpoint that you reach, ideally, you'd push to get, just so that you have a place to revert back to if you mess something up.